My name is Aria Dalton. I'm 29 years old, and on my birthday, my friends laughed at the one thing that reminded me of my late father, his old, worn-out watch. Birthdays are supposed to make you feel celebrated, but that night, I'd never felt smaller. The restaurant glowed with golden lights and laughter that didn't quite reach my heart. I had spent the last week telling myself to enjoy the evening, to relax, to let my friends spoil me for once, but all I could think about was how out of place I felt. They were all dressed like they'd walked out of a fashion magazine, while I wore a simple navy dress I'd owned for 3 years. I'd straightened my hair, added a little mascara, and even borrowed heels from my roommate, but nothing could hide that I didn't belong to their world of brand names and champagne. When the waiter poured our wine, I caught the glint of my father's watch on my wrist. It was scratched, the leather strap cracking, the glass slightly fogged near the edges. It wasn't pretty, not anymore, but it was the only thing of his I still had. He'd given it to me 2 days before he passed away, pressing it into my palm with the words, "Keep this safe, Ari. It's more special than it looks." At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. That night, though, sentimentality wasn't what my friends saw. "Oh my God, Aria, you're still wearing that old thing?" My friend Kayla laughed, tossing her sleek blonde hair over her shoulder. "It's kind of vintage, I guess," she added, in a tone that made it sound like an insult. Everyone at the table turned to look at the watch. I tried to smile, tucking my wrist under the table, but Mason, my boyfriend, grabbed my hand and lifted it. "Come on, let's see this antique again," he said teasingly. The others laughed. "It's so old-fashioned," another friend chimed in. "You should let Mason buy you something new, something elegant." Mason chuckled, leaning back. I offered, but she's emotionally attached, says it was her dad's or something. I forced a laugh even as my chest tightened. "It was my dad's," I said quietly. "It's just special." "Special?" Kayla snorted. "Babe, it looks like it's been through a war. You could probably get, what, $5 for it at a pawn shop?" Everyone laughed again. I smiled faintly, pretending it didn't sting, but every laugh felt like a slap. The waiter arrived with a cake chocolate with gold flakes, and as they sang, I made my wish silently. "Please, just let this night be over." When the candles were blown out and the check paid, Mason draped an arm around me as we walked out. "You know they're just teasing," he said. "Don't take it so seriously." "I'm not," I lied. "It's just a watch." But it wasn't just a watch. It was the last piece of my father I had, the only thing that made me feel like he was still with me somehow. That little scratch near the 3 o'clock mark? He'd told me it happened when I was a baby, when he caught the stroller before it rolled into the street. Every flaw on it told a story, and every story was a memory of him. As we reached my car, Kayla suddenly laughed again. "Hey, you know what would be funny?" she said. "Take that thing to a jeweler. Maybe it's secretly worth a fortune, or maybe they'll pay you to throw it away." The others burst into laughter again. Mason smirked. "Yeah, maybe it's some rare collector's piece, huh? You'd better check before it falls apart completely." I smiled politely, playing along. "Sure, maybe I will." But as I drove home later that night, the laughter replayed in my head. I shouldn't have cared, but I did. Their words clung to me like smoke. Maybe I was holding on to the past too tightly. Maybe it was ridiculous to wear an old watch when everyone around me flaunted the newest tech and designer jewelry. Still, as I parked outside my apartment and turned off the engine, I couldn't take it off. I sat there for a while, staring at the faded dial glowing faintly in the dim light. The hands ticked slowly, steady, as if time itself refused to give up on me. My father's voice echoed in my mind, "It's more special than it looks." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I wasn't sure I wanted to. That night, as I placed the watch carefully on my nightstand before bed, I caught myself wondering, what if they were right? What if there was something unusual about it? The thought stayed with me, circling my mind as I drifted to sleep. I told myself I'd forget about it by morning, but something deep inside me stirred a quiet curiosity I couldn't shake. But when one of them suggested taking it to a jeweler for a laugh, I never imagined how that single joke would change everything. The next morning, I stood in front of a high-end jewelry store, gripping the watch that everyone mocked. The morning air was crisp, the kind that carried a faint chill of reality. I hadn't planned on actually going to a jeweler, But there I was, standing outside Hanley & Co. Fine Jewelers, one of the most prestigious shops in the city. Its spotless glass doors reflected my uncertain face back at me, making me feel both foolish and curious. I told myself I was only doing this to prove a point to silence the echo of laughter from last night. Maybe I wanted to confirm it truly was worthless, so I could finally let go. Or maybe, a small part of me still believed in my father's words. It's more special than it looks. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and old money. The walls gleamed with mahogany panels, and spotlights glinted off countless gemstones locked behind glass displays. Everything screamed elegance and exclusivity. I immediately felt like an imposter in my modest jeans and sweater. A young clerk in a crisp uniform approached, his smile professional but distant. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I hesitated before holding out the watch. "I just wanted to know if this has any value." His eyes flicked down at the worn leather band, and his smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I see." He took it gingerly, like it might leave a stain on his gloves. "It looks quite old. Do you know what brand it is?" I shook my head. "It belonged to my father. He never said much about it." "Well, I can have someone take a look," he said, clearly trying to hide his disinterest. He motioned to the back of the store. "Mr. Hanley might know more. He's our senior appraiser, 40 years in the business." As he disappeared behind a glass door, I glanced around nervously. The store was quiet except for the faint ticking of clocks on the wall. A woman beside me was buying a diamond bracelet worth more than my car. I almost turned to leave, embarrassed by how out of place I felt. Then the clerk returned. But this time, his demeanor was different. His posture had straightened, and his tone softened slightly. Mr. Hanley would like to speak with you personally." I followed him to a back room lined with velvet boxes and magnifying lamps. Behind a wooden desk sat an older man with silver hair and sharp, kind eyes. He was polishing his glasses when I entered. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and calm. "I'm Robert Hanley. You must be Miss Dalton." "Yes," I said, my heart pounding slightly. "It's just an old watch. I didn't expect—" He raised a hand gently. "Let's take a look before we decide that." He set the watch under a lamp, his expression instantly changing as the light hit the dial. He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer. Then he reached for a jeweler's loupe and peered through it, silent for several long seconds. "This is interesting," he murmured. I shifted uneasily. "Interesting how?" Instead of answering, he called out, "Ben, bring me the reference guide and the loupe scope, please." Another jeweler appeared, curious, as Mr. Hanley carefully turned the watch over in his gloved hands. He pressed a small button on the side, revealing the faint engraving on the inner lid. He said softly. "Do you know where your father got this?" I shook my head. "No. He just always wore it. He told me it was important." Mr. Hanley nodded slowly, eyes narrowing in concentration. "Important, yes. I can see why." The other jeweler hovered nearby, whispering something I couldn't hear. Mr. Hanley frowned, nodded once, and looked back at me. "Miss Dalton, may I ask, was your father ever involved in design or engineering?" "Not that I know of," I said. "He worked overseas for a few years when I was little, but he didn't talk about it much." Mr. Hanley sat back, tapping his pen lightly against the desk. "This isn't just any vintage piece. This design, I haven't seen it in person, but I've read about it." My mouth went dry. "Read about it?" He gave a small nod. "It bears the markings of a 1,950 Swiss prototype from a company that no longer exists. Only 3 were ever rumored to have been made and none have surfaced publicly. Until now." I blinked, stunned. "You're saying this is rare?" "Extremely rare," he said quietly. "Possibly one of a kind." The other jeweler spoke up, sounding a little breathless. "We should contact the archives immediately." "If this matches what I think it does." Mr. Hanley nodded, his calm professionalism slipping into something closer to awe. "Yes, we'll need confirmation." I stared at him, barely understanding. "You mean it's valuable?" He met my eyes seriously. "Potentially very valuable. But more importantly, it's historically significant. I need to verify a few details before I can say more." The words spun around in my head. Valuable. Significant. Rare. It didn't make sense. My father's old, worn-out watch, the same one everyone mocked, couldn't possibly be worth much. Still, I found myself nodding as he spoke. We'll keep it here under secure conditions while we verify authenticity. You'll have full documentation once it's confirmed. I hesitated, then handed it over carefully. The moment it left my fingers, I felt strangely hollow, like I'd given away a piece of myself. Mr. Hanley smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, Miss Dalton. You might be sitting on something extraordinary. I managed a weak smile. I just thought it was sentimental. He looked at me meaningfully. Sometimes sentiment hides true worth. As I left the shop, the city noise seemed distant, muted. My hands trembled slightly as I held the receipt for the appraisal. Then Mr. Hanley looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, Miss Dalton, do you have any idea what this is? I felt my heart pound as the jeweler's question echoed in my head. Do I have any idea what this is? The words looped in my mind like a song I couldn't stop hearing. Standing there in that spotless, brightly lit room, I realized I hadn't moved for several seconds. My throat felt dry as I finally managed to whisper, No, I don't. What is it? Mr. Hanley took a deep breath and removed his glasses, resting them on the table beside the watch. Miss Dalton, he said carefully, I've handled thousands of timepieces in my career, everything from royal heirlooms to prototype mechanisms, but I've never seen one quite like this. He motioned for me to come closer. Under the magnified light, the watch's worn exterior looked almost alive. Tiny engravings shimmered just beneath the scratches. He pointed at a barely visible mark near the crown, a symbol that looked like two interlocking letters, V and R. This emblem, he explained, was the insignia of a Swiss manufacturer called Vance and Romer. They were innovators in precision timekeeping during the early 1950 seconds. But the company disappeared mysteriously before their designs reached mass production. I frowned. So you're saying this is one of theirs? He nodded slowly. More than that. This could be one of the last surviving prototypes, if not the last. My heart started racing. But how would my father have gotten it? He wasn't rich, or famous, or... Mr. Hanley held up a hand. Sometimes, valuable things find their way to ordinary people through extraordinary circumstances. You mentioned he worked overseas? Yes, I said, trying to recall the fragments of old conversations. When I was maybe 5 or 6. He went to Switzerland for a year. I thought it was for accounting or management. Mr. Hanley exchanged a look with his assistant. That may not have been the full story. I laughed nervously. Are you saying my dad was some kind of secret watch collector? He smiled faintly. Perhaps more of a guardian than a collector. This watch was never released publicly. It wasn't meant to leave the factory at all. I stared at the watch, trying to reconcile its simple, weathered appearance with the idea of rarity. So, how much could it be worth? I asked quietly. He leaned back, clearly reluctant to guess. It depends on verification. If confirmed authentic, you could be looking at several $100,000, perhaps more. The room suddenly felt smaller. My pulse thudded in my ears. Hundreds of thousands. That wasn't a number people like me ever expected to hear about something we owned. Mr. Hanley stood and walked toward a filing cabinet, retrieving a folder. We'll need to contact the Vance and Romer archives in Switzerland. There's a historian there who can confirm the serial markings. I could barely form words. Okay, yes, please do that. As he filled out paperwork, I stared at the watch, my father's watch, lying beneath the sterile glow of the lamp. Every memory I had of him, the laughter, the quiet talks, the long walks home after school suddenly felt heavier. He'd told me to keep it safe, but he'd never told me why. Mr. Hanley looked up again, his tone more serious now. Miss Dalton, I'll need your permission to remove the back casing for inspection. It's essential for authentication, but we'll handle it with utmost care. I nodded numbly. Do whatever you need. He gave a small, reassuring smile before turning back to the desk. With delicate precision, he loosened the casing screws and lifted the backplate. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Inside, the intricate gears gleamed like miniature constellations. Then, as the inner plate shifted, I saw something etched along the metal edge letters so small I might have missed them entirely. Do you see that? I asked softly. Mr. Hanley leaned in closer, squinting. Yes, initials, J, D, and another name beside them, R, Vance. I froze. J, D, those are my father's initials. James Dalton. He looked up at me, eyebrows raised. Then it seems your father and Richard Vance, the company's lead designer, knew each other personally. I couldn't speak. The room spun slightly as I stared at the tiny letters. My father's initials, carved beside a man's name I'd never heard before. What did it mean? Mr. Hanley's assistant whispered something about contacting the archives immediately. Hanley nodded but didn't take his eyes off me. Miss Dalton, this engraving wasn't part of the company's standard prototype process. This was done intentionally, and privately. I swallowed hard. So, he wasn't just keeping it because it was a nice watch. Hanley shook his head. No, he was keeping it because it meant something. The words hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, my father's secrecy, his late nights at the kitchen table staring at the watch, his quiet warnings to keep it safe, they all started forming a pattern I couldn't yet see clearly. Hanley straightened, closing the case carefully. I'll reach out to the Swiss office immediately. In the meantime, I recommend you tell no one about this. Not your friends, not your boyfriend. If this is what I think it is, it could attract unwanted attention. Unwanted attention? I repeated, uneasy. He nodded solemnly. Collectors, historians, opportunists. The moment word gets out, you won't have peace. I managed a shaky laugh. You make it sound like some kind of secret treasure. Sometimes, he said softly, that's exactly what these things are. As I left the store, my legs felt unsteady. The city looked the same, the traffic, the chatter, the passing faces, but everything inside me had shifted. I glanced down at the empty spot on my wrist where the watch used to sit. For the first time, it wasn't just a memory of my father. It was a mystery, a connection to a past I didn't understand. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. But just as I handed the watch back for testing, I noticed a faint engraving on the inner lid, my father's initials beside another man's name I didn't recognize. That second name burned into my memory. I needed to know who it was. The moment I left Hanley & Co., I couldn't think about anything else. My father's initials, J.D., carved beside the name R. Vance. The letters etched so neatly, so deliberately, as though they were meant to be found one day by me. When I got home, I dropped my bag on the couch and sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop. I typed the name Richard Vance Watchmaker into the search bar. The results that appeared made my pulse quicken. There he was, Richard Vance, an acclaimed Swiss horologist from the 1950 seconds, a man credited with pioneering precision watch movements before his mysterious disappearance. Several articles mentioned his company, Vance and Romer, and the controversy that followed. Accusations of stolen designs, missing prototypes, and a scandal that led to the company's abrupt closure. One article even mentioned the lost Vance prototype, a watch rumored to contain revolutionary internal mechanics decades ahead of its time. I stared at the photo of Vance, a middle-aged man with intense eyes and steady hands, and I felt a strange chill. My father's initials were engraved beside his name. Was my father involved with this man? Or worse, was he the reason the prototype disappeared? I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying Mr. Hanley's words, tell no one. Mason texted twice, asking how the appraisal went, but I ignored him. I wasn't ready to tell anyone, not until I understood what I was dealing with. The next morning, my phone rang as I poured coffee. It was Mr. Hanley. Miss Dalton, he said, his voice filled with cautious excitement. I received preliminary confirmation from the Swiss archives. They believe your watch is genuine. The original Vance blueprints match its structure perfectly. My hand trembled. So it's authentic? Authentic and possibly the only surviving piece, he said. The company made 3 prototypes, all reported missing or destroyed. Yours may be the last remaining one. I nearly dropped my mug. That can't be possible. My father, he wasn't rich or powerful. He wouldn't have stolen something like that. Mr. Hanley's tone softened. I didn't say he stole it, Miss Dalton. There could be 1,000 explanations, but what matters is that you now hold a historically significant artifact. I'll need your consent to begin the authentication documentation for insurance and provenance. I agreed, though I barely processed his words. When we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the wall, my thoughts spiraling. Later that day, things began to change. It started with the phone calls. At first, they were polite inquiries, collectors, journalists, enthusiasts, who somehow heard whispers about a rediscovered prototype. Mr. Hanley must have shared the news discreetly within the industry, but rumors have a way of spreading like wildfire. By evening, I'd received a dozen messages from strangers offering to buy the watch, some with figures that made my head spin. When I checked social media, I realized one of my so-called friends, Layla, had posted something cryptic. "Guess who's sitting on a gold mine without knowing it?" The comments beneath it were full of guesses and jokes about me. That's when Mason called. "Aria." "Hey," he said, his voice suddenly warm, sugary. "I heard something about that watch of yours. Did you find out what it's worth?" I hesitated. "It's being appraised. That's all I know." "Come on," he pressed. "You can tell me. We're a team, right?" I closed my eyes. Last night he'd barely noticed me, and now he was playing the concerned boyfriend. "There's nothing to tell yet, Mason," I said flatly. He laughed softly. "All right, but don't forget about me when you're rich." When we hung up, I felt a pang of something disappointment. Maybe, or realization. His tone wasn't love, it was hunger. Over the next few days, the noise around me grew louder. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly wanted to catch up. Even coworkers stopped by my desk with two bright smiles. Everyone wanted to know if it was true that the old watch was worth a fortune. But amidst all that, one thought haunted me more than any rumor. The engraving. R. Vance. Who was he really to my father? That evening, I dug through the old wooden box of my father's belongings that I'd kept tucked away in my closet. Receipts, postcards, a few photographs. Then, at the very bottom, I found a folded, yellowed document, his employment certificate from a company in Geneva. My eyes widened as I read the faded logo, Vance and Romer S.A. So it was true. My father hadn't just owned the watch. He'd worked there. He must have known Richard Vance personally. I sat back, my pulse racing, as the pieces began to fall into place. My father's cryptic warning, "Keep it safe, Aria. It's more special than it looks." He'd known exactly what he was leaving me, but why the secrecy? Why never tell me the truth? The next morning, Mr. Hanley called again. His voice was steady but held a hint of urgency. "Miss Dalton, the manufacturer's archive curator in Switzerland is very interested in meeting you. They want to see the watch themselves. It's a historic discovery." "Is that safe?" I asked hesitantly. He chuckled. "Perfectly. They're professionals. You'll be treated with respect and possibly rewarded for bringing it forward." "Rewarded?" I repeated, the word tasting strange on my tongue. He laughed softly. "When something of this magnitude surfaces, everyone wants a piece of the story." I wasn't sure whether that comforted or terrified me. That night, I placed my father's old papers beside my bed and stared at the watch's empty box. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father's simple life, was crumbling. As I drifted toward uneasy sleep, a sense of unease washed over me like someone, somewhere, already knew what I was discovering. When I went to bed that night, I had no idea that someone else already knew about the watch and wanted it. It started with the strange message I found on my phone the next morning. The sun had barely risen when my phone buzzed beside my pillow. I blinked groggily, expecting it to be a text from work or Mason, but what I saw made me sit up instantly. The message was from an unknown number. "Don't sell the watch, it's not what you think." I stared at the screen, reading it again and again. No name, no context, just that. My stomach tightened as dread crept in. How would anyone know I even had the watch, much less that I might sell it? Only Mr. Hanley, his assistant, and Mason knew about the appraisal. I jumped out of bed and went straight to my front door. The hallway was empty. No note, no sign of anyone. My heart was thudding so hard it hurt. I tried to convince myself it was just a scammer fishing for information. But deep down, I knew better. By the time I got to work, my nerves were frayed. Numbers blurred on my computer screen, and every sound made me flinch. When Mason called around lunch, I forced my voice to sound calm. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. "You sound weird." "Just tired." I lied. "Did you tell anyone about the watch?" He paused for a beat too long. "Of course not." "Why?" "Nothing. I just got a strange message this morning." He laughed. "Aria, you're letting this thing get to your head. Delete it and move on." Maybe he was right. Maybe it was just paranoia. But when I got home that evening, my front door was slightly open. My breath caught. I froze in the hallway, listening. Silence. Carefully, I pushed the door open. Everything looked normal until I noticed the jewelry box on my dresser sitting wide open. I never left it like that. The watch wasn't there. Of course I'd left it with Mr. Hanley, but the rest of my jewelry had been moved, some of it scattered across the dresser. Someone had been inside. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived, checked the apartment, and found no signs of forced entry. One of them suggested maybe I'd forgotten to lock the door. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But they shrugged it off and told me to be careful. After they left, I sat on my couch, shaking. Every creak in the building made me jump. That's when I realized what Mr. Hanley had meant by unwanted attention. Later that night, I called him and told him everything: the text, the break-in, the fear gnawing at me. He didn't sound surprised. "I was afraid of that," he said quietly. "Word spreads fast in this field, Miss Dalton. Collectors can be persistent, and not all of them are ethical." "What do I do?" I whispered. "Keep calm. I've secured the watch in our vault under insurance protection. It's safe. You should avoid discussing it with anyone, including friends. I'll call you once the manufacturer confirms the authentication." His calmness steadied me a little, but as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of my control. The next day, I noticed a black car parked across from my building. It wasn't one of the usual cars from my street, and it stayed there the entire morning. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence, but when I walked out to get groceries, the car started up and rolled slowly down the block. My reflection in the tinted window caught my eye, and I swear I saw a silhouette in the driver's seat watching me. That night, Mason came over unannounced. He brought takeout and flowers, acting sweet, attentive, too attentive. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," he said, setting down the food. "You've been acting distant lately." "I've had a lot on my mind," I said flatly. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." I hesitated, then decided to test him. "What if I told you the watch might actually be worth a lot?" His eyes flickered, barely noticeable, but I saw it. "That's great, babe. I mean, you deserve some good luck." "Yeah," I said, studying him. "Good luck." He tried to change the subject, but something in me had already shifted. The easy trust I'd once had in him was gone. When he left later that night, I noticed his phone light up as he bent to tie his shoes. A text preview flashed across the screen. It was from Layla. "Did she bite yet? We need to move fast before someone else does." My blood ran cold. I stayed perfectly still, pretending not to notice, but my heart was hammering. I waited until he left, then sat on the floor, shaking. I opened my laptop and stared at the email inbox where I'd been waiting for updates from Mr. Hanley. My fingers hovered over the keyboard when a new email appeared. No subject line, just an attachment. I clicked it open. It was a document, an official-looking offer, with letterhead from a private European collectors foundation. The message was simple. "Miss Dalton, we are prepared to offer 7 figures for the acquisition of your Vance prototype. Please contact us before public disclosure. Sincerely, Richard Vance Jr." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 7 figures. And the name, Richard Vance Jr. It was the same name engraved beside my father's. The same one I'd read in every article. My father's initials were next to R. Vance. And now someone claiming to be his son was reaching out to me. Coincidence? Or something far more complicated? That night, I opened my email and froze. There was an offer for 7 figures, signed with the same name engraved beside my father's. The message claimed to be from Richard Vance's son. I must have reread that email a dozen times, my pulse racing faster each time. The tone was formal, polite, but beneath the careful wording, I felt something cold and urgent. Whoever this Richard Vance Jr. was, he knew about the watch, its history, and me. I sat there in the dark, the glow of my laptop illuminating my pale face, and tried to steady my breathing. I wasn't ready to believe it was real, not yet, but part of me couldn't ignore the chill that ran down my spine. I finally replied, keeping my message short. "How did you get my contact information?" An hour later, I got a response. "My family has been searching for that watch for decades. It was stolen from my father's private collection in 1957. We traced it through old company records and found the name James Dalton among the engineers involved in the prototypes. I believe your father took it to keep it safe from people who wanted to destroy it. Please don't sell it to anyone until we speak." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. "My father stole it?" No, that couldn't be true. He wasn't a thief. He was the kind of man who returned extra change at the grocery store. But the message made sense in a twisted way. His sudden move back from Switzerland, his quietness about his work there, his insistence that I keep the watch safe. Had he been protecting it all this time? The next morning, I called Mr. Hanley and told him about the email. His reaction was immediate. Miss Dalton, do not engage any further. If this man truly represents the Vance estate, he would go through the manufacturer or through us directly, not via email. This sounds off. I promised I'd be careful, but curiosity was already gnawing at me. That evening, another message arrived from Richard Vance Jr. It contained a scanned photo, black and white, faded with time. My breath caught as I opened it. In the photo, my father stood beside another man in a workshop. Both wore lab coats, and my father looked young, maybe early 30s, with that same gentle smile I remembered from childhood. The man beside him looked exactly like the photo of Richard Vance I'd found online. Proof, the email said. They were friends. My father trusted yours. Please, let me meet you in person. There's more you need to know. I didn't respond. I closed my laptop and paced my living room, torn between fear and the desperate need for answers. The following day, I went back to Hanley & Co. Mr. Hanley greeted me with his usual calm, though I could see worry in his eyes. I spoke with my contact in Switzerland, he said. They've confirmed your watch's authenticity, but they also warned me that several private collectors have been trying to claim lost Vance prototypes over the years. Some are legitimate, others are not. I swallowed hard. So this could be a scam? Or worse, he said. Manipulate ownership before the documentation is finalized. That's why I suggest we keep everything strictly confidential until the official papers are issued. I nodded, trying to appear calm. But inside, I was trembling. After leaving the shop, I decided to dig deeper myself. I went through my father's old storage boxes again, looking for anything that might link him to Vance. And tucked between faded passports and work documents, I found an envelope marked private. Inside were 2 letters written in neat cursive, one addressed to my father from someone named R. Vance. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. If they find out we kept one, they'll destroy everything. I'm counting on you, James. Protect it. One day, your daughter will understand. My knees nearly gave out. It was real. Their friendship, the watch, the warning, it all lined up. But before I could process it, Mason called again. Hey, he said casually. I was thinking, if that collector guy really is who he says he is, maybe you should just sell it. Cash out while you can. I felt my chest tighten. You don't get it, Mason. It's not about the money. He laughed softly. Sure, it's not. But if someone's offering 7 figures, why wait? That's when I realized it wasn't curiosity in his voice. It was greed. Mason, I said slowly. How do you even know about that email? There was silence on the line. Then he said, Layla mentioned it. You know, your friend? She said you told her. I didn't, I snapped. You went through my messages, didn't you? He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. When I hung up, I was shaking. The one person I thought I could trust was using me, just like everyone else. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my apartment seemed alive. I thought about the man claiming to be Richard Vance's son, about Mason, about the break-in. The web was tightening around me, and I didn't know who was pulling the strings. Just before dawn, I opened my father's letter again, tracing the faded words with my fingers. Protect it. One day, your daughter will understand. I whispered into the empty room. I'm trying, Dad. I really am. Then, as if the universe wanted to mock me, my phone buzzed once more. It was a new message from the same unknown number that had texted me before. They're coming for it. Don't trust anyone. And when I checked Mason's phone while he showered, I saw a message from one of my friends talking about how to split the profit once the watch was sold. My hands trembled as I realized the people closest to me were planning to betray me. I stared at Mason's phone screen, the words blurring as anger and disbelief fought inside me. We'll split it 3 ways once she signs the deal. The message was from Layla, my so-called best friend since college. And Mason had replied with a thumbs up and a grinning emoji. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. I had trusted these people, laughed with them, cried with them, and now they were plotting to cash in on something that wasn't theirs. something my father had protected his whole life. I put the phone down quietly, my pulse hammering in my ears. I couldn't let him know I'd seen it. I couldn't confront him, not yet. I needed to think. When Mason came out of the shower, whistling, I forced a shaky smile. "Hey, I'm going to head out for a bit," I said casually. He nodded, toweling his hair. "Sure. You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just some errands." The moment I stepped outside, the cool air hit me like a slap. My thoughts were spinning too fast to keep up. Mason, Layla, who else knew? How deep did this go? I didn't go home. Instead, I drove straight to Mr. Hanley's store. He looked up in surprise as I rushed in. "Miss Dalton," he said, rising from behind the counter. "You look pale. Has something happened?" I sat down opposite him and lowered my voice. "Someone close to me is trying to manipulate me into selling the watch. I think they're working together." Mr. Hanley's kind eyes hardened. "I'm sorry, Miss Dalton. Unfortunately, money brings out the worst in people. I just don't know who I can trust anymore," I said. "You can trust me," he replied firmly. "The watch is secured in our high-grade vault, and I've added your name as the sole authorized claimant. No one can access it without you." His reassurance was the first comfort I'd felt in days. Still, the betrayal gnawed at me. I decided to play along with Mason and Layla, at least until I could understand their plan. That night, I returned home and acted as if nothing had happened. Mason cooked dinner, pretending to be the doting boyfriend. I pretended to believe him. When he asked, "So, have you thought about what you'll do with the money if you sell it?" I smiled sweetly. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Maybe I'll surprise you." He grinned, clearly thinking he was manipulating me, unaware that the tables had quietly turned. For the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I met with Layla for coffee, and when she casually brought up the watch, I acted oblivious. "So," she said, stirring her latte, "that collector's still interested?" I shrugged. "Maybe. But I'm not rushing it. My dad's watch means a lot to me." She leaned in, her tone falsely sympathetic. "Of course it does. But come on, Arya, you could change your whole life with that money. Don't you want to travel? Buy something nice?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to throw my drink in her face, but instead, I smiled back. "You're right," I said softly. "Maybe I'll sell it after all." The gleam of satisfaction in her expression told me everything I needed to know. That evening, I called a lawyer, a calm, confident woman named Dana Price, recommended by one of Mr. Hanley's contacts. She met me the next morning in her downtown office, her tone sharp and professional. "So," she said, reviewing the documents I'd brought, "this watch was inherited from your father, with no official record of transfer from any other entity?" "That's right." She nodded. "Then it's legally yours. Regardless of anyone's claims or offers, no one can compel you to sell or surrender it without your consent." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. I just needed to be sure." Dana's expression softened. "Be cautious, Miss Dalton. Rare finds attract all kinds of investors, thieves, manipulators. If I were you, I'd avoid showing any sign of interest in selling until the provenance paperwork is finalized." When I left her office, the city felt different, less chaotic, more controlled. For the first time, I had a plan. Over the next week, I focused on learning everything I could about my father's time in Switzerland. I reached out to an online forum for horology enthusiasts and, through a long thread about Vance and Romer, found a retired engineer who claimed to have worked there in the 1,950 seconds. His name was Dieter Klein. We spoke over video call that night. His accent was thick, his hair white as snow, but his memory was sharp. "James Dalton," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "Yes, I remember that name. He worked closely with Richard Vance on the prototypes. They were very good friends. After the company fell apart, everyone thought both of them vanished. But your father, he was different. Quiet man. Honest. Do you know why he might have kept one of the watches?" I asked carefully. Klein smiled sadly. "To protect it. There were people who wanted to erase Vance's work, to claim it for themselves. Maybe your father took it to keep it safe. Maybe he promised Vance he would." I felt tears welling in my eyes. My father hadn't been a thief, he'd been a protector. Before hanging up, Klein said something that stayed with me. "If your father engraved his name beside Vance's, it was because they shared that burden. He wanted you to know one day that he did the right thing. That night, I sat on my bed, clutching the small photo I'd found of my father in Switzerland. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear, pride. He wasn't just a man with an old watch. He was part of a secret that mattered. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'll protect it like you did, Dad." But when I opened the drawer of his old belongings again, something caught my eye, a letter I'd missed before, tucked beneath the lining of the box. The paper was brittle, the ink faint, but one sentence stood out clearly at the bottom. "If you're reading this, it means they found out. Tell Richard's son the truth before they destroy it again." My hands trembled as I traced the words, my heart pounding. They found out. Found out what? But what I found in one of his old letters made me realize he might have stolen it to protect someone else. The letter was dated a week before my father disappeared from Switzerland. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, the brittle letter trembling in my hands. My father's handwriting, strong, slanted, and familiar, covered the yellowing page. Every word filled with urgency. He'd written it just before leaving Switzerland. And in it, he confessed what he'd done. He hadn't taken the watch out of greed. He'd taken it to protect Richard Vance's final design, the prototype they'd built together. He said the company had been infiltrated by people who wanted to destroy Vance's inventions and steal his patents for themselves. They were afraid Vance's work would outshine the firm's wealthy investors. My father wrote that he and Vance had planned to expose the corruption, but before they could, everything fell apart. The last line made my chest ache. "If anyone ever finds this, tell Richard I kept my promise." I stared at the words until my eyes blurred with tears. He hadn't just been protecting a friend, he'd been protecting a legacy. But if my father had meant for me to tell Richard, how could I do that now? Vance was long dead. Only this so-called Richard Vance Jr. had reached out. Was he the person my father wanted me to find, or just another manipulator trying to use his name? I needed proof. That evening, I sat down at my laptop and wrote back to the mysterious email. "If you're really Richard Vance's son, prove it." The reply came within an hour. "Check your mail tomorrow. I'll send you something only my father and James Dalton would know existed." It was past midnight when I finally managed to fall asleep, the letter still clutched in my hand. The next day, I returned home from work to find a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. My heart pounded as I tore it open. Inside was a photograph, old and grainy, but unmistakable. My father and Richard Vance stood together in a workshop, surrounded by tools and blueprints. Scrawled across the back in faded ink were the words, "To James, keep it safe, Richard." I sank into my couch, speechless. The handwriting matched the letters exactly. Whoever this man was, he wasn't lying about their connection. After an hour of pacing and overthinking, I made a decision that scared me more than anything had in years. I would meet him, but on my terms. I emailed him back. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Cafe Roma on 5th. Public place only." He responded almost immediately. "Agreed, I'll be there." The next morning, I dressed simply jeans, a gray sweater, hair tied back. I tucked my father's letter in my bag, as if carrying a piece of his strength with me. When I arrived, Cafe Roma was half full. I scanned the crowd nervously until a man at a corner table lifted a hand. He looked to be in his late 40s, neatly dressed, with graying hair and kind eyes that didn't quite hide his exhaustion. "Miss Dalton?" he asked as I approached. His accent was faintly European. "Yes," I said cautiously. "You're Richard?" He nodded, offering a smile. "Richard Vance. My father and yours were close friends. I'm glad you agreed to meet." I sat, keeping my bag close. "You said you could prove your identity." He reached into his briefcase and handed me a leather-bound notebook. "This was my father's design log. The last entry mentions your father by name." I flipped through carefully. The pages were filled with sketches, notes, and equations far beyond my understanding. Then I saw my father's name written in the margin, beside a hand-drawn schematic of the very watch that now sat in Hanley's vault. My breath caught. This is real." He nodded solemnly. "Your father saved my father's legacy. When the company turned on him, he risked everything to protect the prototype. I've been trying to find it ever since." For a moment, I believed him. Everything lined up: the photo, the letter, the handwriting, but something in his eyes made me pause. His gaze flicked to my bag more than once, as if he knew what was inside. and his hands steady when we first sat down, now trembled slightly. I asked, "If your father trusted mine, why contact me anonymously? Why not go through the manufacturer like everyone else?" He hesitated. "Because the company can't be trusted. The same people who wanted to destroy my father's work still have influence there. I didn't want them interfering." It sounded reasonable enough, but something in his voice didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it, but my gut screamed at me to be careful. When he excused himself to take a phone call, I pulled out my phone to text Mr. Hanley, but before I could type, it buzzed in my hand. His name lit up on the screen. "Miss Dalton," he said urgently, his voice sharp and trembling. "Do not trust anyone claiming to be Richard Vance's son. The actual Vance family confirmed they have no surviving heirs." The cafe seemed to tilt. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "The email, the photo, it's all part of an organized ring targeting historical collectors. They've stolen or coerced artifacts before. Leave immediately." I looked up just as the man returned to the table, smiling too easily. "Everything all right?" he asked. I forced a nod, trying to sound calm. "Yes. Actually, I just remembered I have to go. Something urgent came up." He frowned. "But we haven't finished." "I'm sorry," I said, standing quickly and grabbing my bag. "We'll talk another time." I walked out without looking back, every nerve in my body screaming danger. As I stepped into the cool morning air, I realized how close I'd come to falling into whatever trap he'd set. But when I arrived, the man who approached me wasn't who he claimed to be. He introduced himself with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When I walked into that cafe, I thought I was meeting someone who could give me answers about my father. Instead, I'd sat across from a stranger who had rehearsed every word to make me trust him. Now, every glance, every polite smile he'd given me replayed in my mind with a new clarity they were part of an act. After leaving Cafe Roma, I didn't go home. I didn't even go to work. I drove aimlessly around the city, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Fear and humiliation twisted in my stomach. I'd nearly handed over everything my father had protected for decades. When my phone rang, I almost ignored it. But when I saw Mr. Hanley's name, I answered immediately. "Miss Dalton," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need you to listen carefully. We received an alert this morning. Someone tried to access our authentication system remotely using your watch's serial number." My chest tightened. "What? How?" "Whoever it was, they had your father's old employee credentials. We've locked down the files, but this means one thing. Someone is watching us very closely." I pulled my car to the side of the road, trying to breathe. "Do you think it's that man, the fake Richard?" "Most likely," he said grimly. "We're dealing with professional thieves. They target rediscovered artifacts, create fake identities, and trick the owners into surrendering them." The air inside my car felt heavy. "What should I do?" "Go somewhere safe," he said. "Stay away from anyone who's contacted you recently, and don't return home alone tonight." When we hung up, I stared at the steering wheel, feeling the weight of every word. Somewhere between finding the watch and uncovering its story, I'd stumbled into a world of greed and deception far beyond what I'd imagined. That night, I stayed at a small hotel downtown under a different name. I turned off my phone, locked the door, and kept the curtains drawn. I didn't sleep much. Every creak in the walls made me sit up, expecting someone to break in. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was done reacting. I needed to take control again. I called Mr. Hanley from the hotel phone. "I want the watch back," I said firmly. "If it's safer with me, I'll hide it myself." He hesitated. "Miss Dalton, that's risky. Our vault is far more secure than—" "With all due respect, Mr. Hanley, your system was just hacked," I interrupted. "At least if I have it, I'll know where it is." There was silence for a few seconds before he finally sighed. "All right, come by this afternoon, and I'll arrange the paperwork." When I arrived, the store felt different, quieter, almost tense. Mr. Hanley met me in his office, his expression serious. "I've taken extra precautions," he said, unlocking a reinforced drawer. Inside, my father's watch sat nestled in a small velvet case, gleaming faintly under the light. The sight of it made my throat tighten. "I almost lost you," I whispered, touching it gently. "Mr. Hanley smiled softly. "You're doing the right thing. Keep it somewhere private, somewhere no one would think to look." I nodded. But as I turned to leave, he added, "And Miss Dalton, don't tell Mason anything." "I won't," I said quietly. That evening, I drove to a safety deposit facility on the edge of town, a quiet, secure building with steel doors and private vault rooms. I signed a 1-year lease under my middle name and tucked the watch inside a sealed box. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of peace. But it didn't last long. 2 days later, my phone new number, new SIM card buzzed again. The message was short: "You can't hide what doesn't belong to you." I dropped the phone. My heart pounded as I realized whoever was behind this still had eyes on me. That evening, Mr. Hanley called again, his tone strained. "Miss Dalton, you need to come to the shop tomorrow. I've received final confirmation from Switzerland. The authentication is complete." "What does that mean?" "It means the watch is officially recognized as the lost Vance prototype. You're its legal owner. But there's something else, something you should see in person." The next morning, I arrived at Hanley & Co. to find him hunched over his magnifying lamp, the watch open on the desk. His assistant hovered nearby, pale and silent. "What is it?" I asked. Mr. Hanley motioned me closer. While completing the verification, I discovered something hidden beneath the mechanism, a secondary compartment I'd missed before. I leaned over the desk, my breath catching as he carefully lifted the inner plate. Beneath the maze of gears, a thin layer of metal caught the light. Etched onto it was a pattern, a design unlike anything I'd seen. "What is that?" I whispered. Mr. Hanley's voice trembled. "It's not part of the watch's standard build. It's a micro-engraving, possibly a mechanical blueprint. I think your father and Richard Vance hid something inside this watch." The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on us. "Could it be his final invention?" I asked. Mr. Hanley nodded slowly. "It could be the missing schematic, the one Vance was accused of stealing from his own company." My heart pounded. If that were true, this watch wasn't just valuable, it was evidence. Proof of a scandal that had been buried for nearly 70 years. "I'll need to document this carefully," he said, locking the watch away again. "And you, Miss Dalton, you need to be extremely careful. If people were after the watch before, they'll stop at nothing now." I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." As I left the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just shifted again. The streets looked the same, but my world had changed once more. I thought of my father, his quiet smile, his warning to keep it safe, and realized he'd been protecting far more than a family heirloom. He'd been guarding a secret powerful enough to make people lie, steal, and even risk their lives. And now that secret was mine to protect. But just when things seemed safe again, the jeweler called with one final discovery about the watch's true design. "Mr. Hanley's voice was trembling when he said the watch had a hidden compartment. When I picked up his call, I could hear it in his tone, excitement mixed with something darker, something that sounded a lot like fear. "Miss Dalton," he said, "you need to come to the shop immediately. There's something inside your father's watch that we didn't see before." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean, something inside?" "Just come," he said quickly. "And don't tell anyone where you're going." I was out the door within minutes, my pulse hammering as I drove through the late afternoon traffic. By the time I arrived at Hanley & Co., the shop was already closed to the public. The blinds were drawn, and a single lamp glowed from the back office. Hanley met me at the door, pale and serious. "I've been doing a more detailed examination," he said, locking the door behind me. When I removed the secondary plate, I found a concealed groove. "There's something sealed inside the casing." He guided me to the workbench, where the watch lay open under bright white light. His hands, steady even in old age, now shook slightly as he adjusted his magnifying lenses. "Look here," he said, pointing at a thin, almost invisible seam around the inner core. I leaned in. It was so subtle I might have missed it entirely. "How do you even open that?" I asked. "There's a sequence," he murmured. "A hidden mechanism, like a puzzle. I've seen similar features in only a handful of experimental models." He pressed the side crown 3 times, then rotated the bezel counterclockwise. With a faint click, a sliver of the inner core shifted. He used a fine tool to lift it free. Inside, the tiny compartment was a wafer-thin metal plate engraved with impossibly small lines like a blueprint. "What is that?" I breathed. "Mr. Hanley exhaled shakily. It's an engineering schematic. The markings correspond to microgear calibrations far ahead of their time. This isn't just a prototype, it's the prototype. The final one Richard Vance designed before the company turned against him. The room fell silent. I could only stare at the intricate etchings that shimmered under the light. My father had hidden this. He'd carried this secret on his wrist every day of his life. Why would he hide it in the watch? I asked. Hanley looked at me with a weary smile. Because it was the only place no one would think to look. Your father wasn't just protecting an object, Miss Dalton. He was protecting proof that Vance was the true genius behind those innovations. Not the men who stole his work. I felt my throat tighten. All those years I'd thought my father was just sentimental. He'd been carrying evidence of a conspiracy. What happens now? I asked. We'll have to document it carefully, Hanley said, placing the small plate into a protective sleeve. Once authenticated, this discovery could rewrite part of watchmaking history. Before he could continue, the sound of his assistant's phone buzzing broke the moment. The young man glanced at the screen, then looked up nervously. Sir, there are reporters outside. Mr. Hanley frowned. Already? He turned to me. Did you tell anyone you were coming? I shook my head. No one. But somehow, they'd found out. Maybe someone had followed me, or maybe someone inside the company had leaked the story. We peeked through the blinds. 2 men with cameras stood near the curb, and a sleek black car idled across the street. I recognized that car. It was the same one I'd seen parked outside my apartment weeks ago. Hanley, I whispered, we need to get this out of here. He nodded grimly. You're right. If word spreads before the discovery is officially registered, you'll be swarmed by collectors and buyers, and possibly worse. We packed the watch and the engraving plate into a secure case. I tucked it under my arm, heart racing. I'll take it to a safety vault again, I said. Somewhere new. As I left the shop, the men outside turned as if they'd been waiting. One raised his phone, pretending to take a call. The other subtly snapped a photo. I kept walking, forcing myself not to run. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building made me jump. I hid the case inside an old shoebox beneath the floorboard in my closet, then sat on my bed, staring at the dark ceiling, my mind racing. The next morning, I woke to dozens of notifications. Someone had leaked the discovery. Articles were already circulating online, headlines like, Lost Vance blueprint found inside prototype watch and anonymous woman holds key to watchmaking's greatest mystery. Someone inside the appraisal chain must have talked. By noon, my inbox was flooded with offers from private buyers, some polite, others demanding. The highest one offered $3 million, all cash. My hands shook as I closed my laptop. $3 million. My father could have lived comfortably for the rest of his life if he'd sold it. But he hadn't. Because to him, it wasn't about money. It was about honor. Mr. Hanley called that afternoon, his voice soft but proud. The blueprint is safe with you? Yes, I said. Hidden. No one knows where. Good, he said. Miss Dalton, what you're doing protecting this is exactly what your father would have wanted. His words steadied me. For the first time, I felt like I understood my father completely. But just as we hung up, I noticed an envelope slipped under my door. No postage, no return address. I crouched down, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in block letters. Your father never acted alone. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. A cold shiver ran through me. My father hadn't been the only one protecting Vance's secret. Someone else had been involved, and that someone might still be out there. Then I received a handwritten letter with no return address, containing just 5 words. Your father never acted alone. Those 5 words reopened questions I thought were settled. I must have read that note 50 times, tracing each letter like it held a hidden clue. Your father never acted alone. The paper smelled faintly of cologne and old books, the kind my father used to read. But there was no signature, no indication of who sent it, only those 5 words that tore open everything I thought I understood. If he hadn't acted alone, then who had helped him? Who else had been part of protecting the watch, and why hadn't they ever come forward? That night, I sat surrounded by papers, old letters, and scanned photos spread across my living room table. Every document, every memory suddenly felt like a puzzle piece. I remembered the engineer I'd spoken to, Dieter Klein. He'd mentioned my father and Richard Vance had tried to expose corruption in the company. Maybe there had been others. allies hidden in the shadows of that long-forgotten betrayal. I needed to find out. The next morning, I called Mr. Hanley. "Someone left me a note," I told him. "It says my father wasn't alone." There was a long silence on the other end. "Do you believe it?" he asked finally. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if it's true, maybe there's someone still alive who can explain all this." Mr. Hanley sighed. "Be careful, Miss Dalton. Every time we dig deeper, the danger grows. Whoever sent that note may not be a friend." I promised him I'd be cautious, but my mind was already made up. Through old company archives and newspaper clippings, I started piecing together the names of engineers who had worked at Vance and Romer during the 1,950 seconds. Most were dead, but one name, Matthias Kruger, kept appearing beside my father's in old design documents. He'd moved to the U.S. decades ago and, according to a local record, still lived in a retirement community 2 hours away. I drove there the next morning, the note tucked safely in my bag. The retirement home was peaceful, surrounded by old oak trees and the distant sound of a fountain. When I introduced myself to the receptionist and mentioned Matthias's name, her eyes softened. "Mr. Kruger doesn't get many visitors," she said. "He'll be glad to see you." She led me to a sunlit garden where an elderly man sat reading under a tree. His hair was white, his hands thin and trembling, but his eyes, sharp and blue, studied me with quiet intelligence. "Mr. Kruger?" I said gently. "My name is Arya Dalton. My father was James Dalton." His eyes widened at the name. Slowly, he set his book down. "James Dalton," he repeated, his accent still faintly German. "I haven't heard that name in many years." "He was my father," I said. "I think you worked together in Switzerland." He nodded slowly. Yes, we did. James was a good man, too good for the men we worked for." I sat across from him, my heart pounding. I found something he left behind. A prototype watch he helped design with Richard Vance, and a note saying he didn't act alone. A flicker of emotion crossed his face, something between fear and pride. "Then you found it," he murmured. "The proof that the company tried to destroy." "What do you mean?" He looked around, lowering his voice. "Richard Vance discovered a flaw in the company's financial reports, money disappearing, patents registered under false names. When he tried to expose it, they accused him of theft. Your father and I helped him hide the last prototype, along with the design that proved Vance was the rightful inventor. We thought if we could preserve it long enough, the truth would survive, even if we didn't." I felt tears sting my eyes. "So, the watch, the blueprint inside, it's all evidence?" He nodded. "Evidence and redemption. Your father wanted to reveal it one day, but when Vance died, he decided it was safer to hide it forever. He told me, 'Arya will know what to do when the time comes.'" My breath caught. "He said that?" Mr. Kruger smiled faintly. "He talked about you often. You were just a little girl, but he loved you more than anything." The warmth of his words filled me, but it was quickly followed by something colder, the realization that someone else had known this truth all along. "Mr. Kruger," I said softly, "if you knew about the watch, why send me that note now?" He looked puzzled. "Note? I didn't send you anything." My heart dropped. "You didn't?" He shook his head. "No. I thought you'd forgotten us all these years." A chill ran through me. If it wasn't him, then who had known about the secret and why warn me now? Before I could ask more, Mr. Kruger reached into his jacket and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a faded photograph of my father, Vance, and Kruger standing together in the workshop. Scrawled on the back were the words, "Truth survives through those who remember." When I left the retirement home, I felt lighter but also watched. A black car had been parked across the street when I arrived, and now it was still there, engine running. My stomach turned. I got into my car and drove away quickly, checking my mirrors every few seconds. That night, I called an investigative journalist I'd once met through work, a woman named Brooke Taylor. I explained everything, the watch, the blueprint, the corruption, my father's role. She listened in silence, then said, "If what you're saying is true, this isn't just a family mystery, it's corporate fraud that's been buried for 70 years. I'll help you. But Arya, you have to be prepared. Once this story comes out, there's no going back." "I know," I said. "I just want the truth out there." Together, we gathered the documents, photographs, and recordings. Brooke began reaching out to historical experts to verify the evidence. It felt like the beginning of justice finally honoring what my father died protecting. But as we were preparing to publish, my phone rang again. It was Mr. Hanley, his voice strained with fear. "Miss Dalton," he said. "I don't know how to tell you this, but someone broke into the vault last night." My heart stopped. "What?" "The vault," he repeated. "The watch, it's gone." But as the story was about to go public, someone broke into the jeweler's vault. The vault was empty when I arrived. The sight of that open safe will haunt me forever. The heavy steel door stood ajar, the air inside the room cold and still, and the velvet-lined display shelf where my father's watch had rested was bare. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body went numb as the reality of it crashed over me, the watch, the blueprint, my father's legacy, all gone. Mr. Hanley stood beside me, his hands shaking. "I don't understand," he whispered. "We have a state-of-the-art security system. There was no forced entry, no alarm triggered." "How is that possible?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You told me no one else had access." "They didn't," he said. "Not legally, anyway." He ran a hand through his hair, the color draining from his face. "The security footage shows 3 masked figures entering through the rear delivery entrance at 2:14 a.m. They knew exactly where to go. It was over in less than 4 minutes. My knees nearly buckled. "They took it," I murmured. "They actually took it." "I'm so sorry, Miss Dalton," he said quietly. "I never imagined something like this could happen." I sank into the nearest chair, burying my face in my hands. Every emotion I'd bottled up, fear, anger, grief, rushed through me all at once. "It wasn't just a watch," I whispered. "It was my father's entire story." The police arrived soon after, their questions relentless. Who else knew about the watch? Had anyone made threats? Had I noticed anything suspicious? I told them everything I could, but as the hours dragged on, I realized I didn't trust the police any more than I trusted anyone else. This wasn't some random theft. It was too precise, too informed. As the officers packed up and left, Mr. Hanley placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. "They'll find it," he said softly, though even he didn't sound convinced. "We'll make sure justice is served." But I'd seen this story too many times before. Artifacts disappeared, investigations stalled, and the truth was quietly buried. I couldn't let that happen, not again. That night, I sat in my car outside the jewelry store, staring at the rain-streaked windshield, replaying every event in my mind. The anonymous messages, the fake Richard Vance, the note that said my father hadn't acted alone. It all felt connected. When I finally drove home, exhaustion hit me like a wave. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my bag onto the couch, and went straight for the bottle of wine on the counter. As I poured myself a glass, something caught my eye, the faintest glint of light near my apartment door. There was an envelope taped to it. Heart pounding, I pulled it free. Inside was a single photograph. It was the watch, my father's watch, sitting on a dark wooden desk. And reflected faintly in the glass display beneath it was Mason's face. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The image trembled in my hands as rage and disbelief washed through me. Mason. The man I'd once loved. The man who'd laughed at that watch. Who'd tried to convince me to sell it. Who'd promised I could trust him. He'd taken it. Or worse, he'd helped the people who did. I stormed into the bedroom, yanking open drawers and digging through boxes until I found an old notebook where I'd scribbled down Mason's new work address after he'd switched jobs last month. I flipped through it with shaking hands and found the name of the company, Portwell Private Holdings. A vague, elite-sounding name, one that suddenly seemed far too convenient. I opened my laptop and typed it into a search engine. Within seconds, I found it. An investment firm that quietly brokered deals for high-value acquisitions. And one of its partners? Layla Vance. Layla, my so-called friend, the woman who'd mocked me at my birthday dinner. Everything fell into place at once: the email offers, the leaks, the fake buyers. They'd all been part of this. Mason and Layla weren't just opportunists, they were working with people who'd been after the watch from the start. My hands trembled as I called Brooke, the journalist. "They took it," I said breathlessly. "And I know who did." "Arya, slow down," she said. "Who?" "Mason and Layla. They're involved with a company that deals in illegal acquisitions. They stole it. I have proof." Don't go after them alone, Brooke warned. Let the police handle it. But I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't sit and wait while they profited off my father's legacy. That night, I packed a small bag, just the essentials, and printed the photo from the envelope. I studied every detail, searching for clues. The desk was dark wood with a distinctive pattern. Behind it, a wall with glass shelves reflected faint city lights. It looked like an upscale office suite. I knew exactly where to find one like that. Portwell Holdings. As I stared at the photo one last time, I made a silent promise to my father. I'll get it back, Dad, I whispered. No matter what it takes. I didn't care if it meant confronting Mason or exposing everyone behind this mess. I was done being a victim. I swore then that I would take back what was mine no matter what it took. I became someone I never imagined, strategic, relentless, and determined. I'd spent my entire life avoiding confrontation, keeping my head down, doing what was safe. But that version of me had died the moment I saw Mason's reflection in that photograph. Now I was someone else, someone with nothing left to lose. For 2 days I watched Portwell Holdings from a distance. Their offices sat in a sleek glass building downtown, all mirrored windows and private. Parking. Every time someone came or went, I took notes: security guards, delivery staff, and occasionally, Mason himself. He always looked sharp, confident, like a man who thought he'd gotten away with something. But what he didn't know was that I had help. Brooke, the journalist, had kept her word. If we're going to expose them, she told me, we need evidence records, communications, anything that ties them to the theft. She introduced me to one of her contacts, a private investigator named Dean Mercer. He'd handled art theft cases before, and when he saw the photo of Mason and the watch, he didn't hesitate. That's your leverage, Dean said. But we'll need more proof of possession and transaction. Once they move it, it's gone for good. Together, we devised a plan. Mason was set to attend a private collectors gala that weekend, an event sponsored, conveniently, by Portwell Holdings. Brooke arranged credentials for Dean and herself as reporters covering the event. My role was simpler and riskier. I'd confront Mason directly, in front of witnesses if I had to. The night of the gala, I wore a black dress and borrowed confidence. My hands shook as I adjusted my hair in the mirror, but my eyes looked different, colder, focused. I wasn't the scared woman who'd been mocked at her birthday anymore. Inside the venue, chandeliers glittered above polished marble floors, and soft classical music filled the air. People mingled with champagne glasses, exchanging quiet laughter and greedy smiles. To anyone watching, it was just another night of luxury, but to me, it felt like walking into a lion's den. Then I saw him. Mason stood near the back, his hand resting casually in his pocket, chatting with a group of investors. Layla was beside him, draped in silver, smiling like the devil herself. I could almost hear her laugh from my birthday echoing in my mind. Dean nodded toward them discreetly. We'll keep an eye on the bidder. Exits, he whispered. You get him talking. I approached slowly, my heels clicking against the floor. Mason turned, his confident smile faltering for just a second when he saw me. Arya? He said, his voice caught between surprise and guilt. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, I replied evenly. Layla's eyes narrowed. This is a private event. You shouldn't be here. Oh, I think I should, I said, stepping closer. You two have something that belongs to me. Layla forced a laugh. We don't know what you're talking about. I held up the photograph, the one they'd left for me, like a taunt. Really? Because this says otherwise. Mason's jaw tightened. He reached out as if to grab the photo, but I pulled it back. Don't, I warned. Not here. People nearby began to notice the tension. A few guests glanced our way. Layla quickly masked her irritation with a sweet smile. Why don't we talk somewhere private? She said. Sure, I replied. Let's. They led me to a small side room off the main hall. The door clicked shut behind us. Layla turned first, her smile gone. You shouldn't have come here, Arya. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I said. You and Mason. You sold me out. You stole from me. You stole from my father. Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not like that, okay? We were just borrowing it. We were going to sell it to get some money, and then, borrowing it? I snapped. You broke into a jeweler's vault, Mason. His face paled. I didn't do that part. I just made introductions. It got out of hand. Layla glared at him. You talk too much. She turned back to me, her tone icy. You think this is about your father's sentimental toy? That watch is worth millions, Arya. Do you have any idea what people would pay for what's inside it? I held her gaze. And do you have any idea what my father gave up to protect it? For a moment, her confidence cracked. Your father? She repeated quietly. He knew exactly what it was worth. He made a deal once, same as us. The only difference is, he got away with it. Her words hit me like a slap. You're lying. But deep down, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of truth. Before I could respond, Dean burst through the door, followed by Brooke. Police are on their way, Brooke said, holding up her phone. We've got everything recorded, your conversation, your confessions, all of it. Layla's face drained of color. Mason swore under his breath. Game's over, Dean said coolly, stepping forward. Layla tried to bolt, but Dean caught her arm just as the sound of sirens wailed outside. Within minutes, uniformed officers filled the hallway. Mason and Layla were both taken away in handcuffs, shouting half-hearted protests as the guests whispered and stared. When the dust settled, Dean turned to me with a small smile. We found it, he said. The watch. They were planning to sell it tonight to a buyer from Zurich. It's safe now. I covered my mouth with both hands, tears blurring my vision. It's really over? For them, yes, he said. But for you, maybe it's just beginning. The police recovered the watch, still intact. The tiny blueprint was untouched, protected beneath its hidden layer just as my father had designed. Later, as I stood outside the venue watching the flashing red and blue lights fade into the distance, I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and sorrow. I'd won, but it hadn't come without loss. Dean handed me the watch in a sealed evidence pouch. You've done your father proud, he said quietly. I nodded, clutching it close. Thank you for everything. He smiled faintly. Be careful, Arya. History has a way of resurfacing when people least expect it. I glanced down at the watch, the faint gleam of its dial reflecting the streetlights. I'll remember that, I whispered. Because when I turned the watch over one last time, I noticed one more secret marking under the glass. The marking was a date, my birthday. It was faint, barely visible unless the light hit it at the perfect angle, but there it was, engraved delicately under the glass cover of the watch, 3/17. My birthday. I stared at it, my throat tightening, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and emotion. My father had carved that. He must have done it years ago, knowing I'd one day find it. For a long time, I just stood there in my living room, the watch resting in my palm, the faint ticking echoing through the silence. After everything, the betrayal, the theft, the lies, this tiny, personal engraving was what broke me. It wasn't about the money, the fame, or the historical value. It was about love. My father's final message to me wasn't hidden in schematics or secret codes. It was this, a simple reminder of me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, holding the watch close, thinking about the man who had once worn it every day of his life. He must have known the chaos it would cause, yet he still believed in protecting it. Not for profit, not for recognition, but for honor, and for the truth. When morning came, the sunlight spilled across the floor, illuminating the faint scratches and scuffs on the watch's casing. Imperfect, worn, yet still beautiful. Just like the story behind it. A week later, I stood before a small group of journalists and museum curators at the National Horology Museum. The watch rested on a velvet stand inside a glass case, its newly discovered blueprint safely documented and archived. Cameras clicked as I spoke, my voice steadier than I expected. My father, James Dalton, worked with Richard Vance in the 1950 seconds, I said. Together, they created this watch, not just a timepiece, but a piece of history that was almost lost forever. For decades, my father protected it from those who wanted to erase its truth. Today, I'm returning it to the world not for money, but for legacy. There was a quiet ripple of applause. A few people wiped their eyes. Somewhere behind the crowd, Mr. Hanley stood smiling proudly, and Brooke gave me a discreet thumbs up. After the ceremony, the museum director approached me, gratitude shining in his eyes. You've done something remarkable, Miss Dalton. Few people would choose preservation over profit. I smiled softly. I didn't choose it. My father did. I just finished what he started. As I left the museum that day, a weight lifted from me, the kind of weight you don't realize you've been carrying until it's gone. The watch no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to history now, where it was always meant to be. Life slowly began to return to normal, or at least as normal as it could after something like that. Mason and Layla's arrest made headlines for weeks, their involvement in international artifact smuggling unraveled like a web. Mr. Hanley testified in court, confirming their attempted sale. They faced years in prison, and though I didn't feel joy about it, I felt closure. Brooks' article, "The Woman Who Protected Time," spread across major outlets, not for sensationalism but for the heart of the story, my father's courage, and the quiet dignity of keeping a promise. For the first time in years, I visited his grave. The morning was bright and calm, the air cool and gentle. I knelt beside his headstone, running my fingers over his name. "It's safe now," I whispered. "Your watch, your secret, they know the truth. You were right all along." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small photograph, the one of him and Richard Vance in the workshop. I placed it at the base of the stone. "You didn't act alone," I said quietly. "And neither did I." The wind picked up slightly, brushing my hair across my face. And for a moment, I could almost feel him there beside me. The faint smell of engine oil and leather, the warmth of his hand guiding mine as a child when he showed me how to read the time. Weeks passed, and with every sunrise, the chaos of the past months began to fade. But peace didn't come instantly. It arrived in small moments, in the quiet hum of morning coffee, in the tick of my kitchen clock, in the simple relief of knowing that my father's legacy wasn't lost to greed or corruption. One evening, I visited the museum again. The exhibit had been unveiled to the public, a modest display titled "The Lost Vance Prototype, The Dalton Legacy." Visitors stood in awe, some marveling at the mechanics, others reading the story behind it. I stood at the back of the room, unnoticed, watching as people admired the watch through its glass case. Under the spotlight, it looked alive again, like it was still keeping time for my father. A young boy pointed at it and asked his mother, "Why is it so special?" She smiled and said, "Because someone loved it enough to protect it." That simple answer hit me harder than any article or headline. I lingered for a while longer, tracing the engraved date through the glass with my eyes, before turning to leave. Outside, the evening air was cool and calm. The city lights reflected on the museum's windows like scattered stars. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. I realized that my father's final message wasn't about history or invention, it was about value. Not the kind measured in money, but the kind that lives in integrity, in loyalty, and in love that outlasts time itself. As I walked away, I glanced back one last time. The watch sat quietly beneath the soft glow of the display light, forever ticking steady, unwavering. And every time I glance at that watch in its glass case, I hear my father's voice saying, "Now you know why it was priceless."